How is it that we use music and the way that it interacts with people to help people with brain diseases and mental health?
Yeah. So going back for a second, in the research, what they found is that music is naturally a very powerful stimulant for the brain. What that really means is brain activity. So when we do challenging things like solving a really complex math equation, bad example because I wouldn't be doing that, but something along those lines, you need more compute power, right? You need to concentrate. Your brain needs a lot of energy to be able to address that particular problem. When we listen to music, there's a lot of different things going on, and it requires different areas of the brain to communicate with each other to make sense of what we're hearing. And that's a really good thing because it's a brain workout. And what we now know, and there's more and more evidence of this, is we, just like our body, we need to continue to stimulate and exercise our brain to stay sharp, elastic, being able to absorb new information and process it. So that's where music becomes really beneficial. Then, if we dive into specific care outcomes, if you will, so if we're addressing, for example, dementia, I'll give you some specific examples to be concrete here. So, dementia is a brain disease which, over time, um, makes it harder and harder for you to do the most basic things because the different areas of your brain are not able to communicate with each other very well. What research has found is that the area of the brain responsible for your long term memory is the last to be impacted by this disease. And as you mentioned yourself before, there are certain songs from your childhood that when you hear them, they just make you feel good. Well, it goes a little step further there. If we're able to find music from your childhood that's connected to your long term memories, we can then activate that part of the brain, and that acts as a trigger to then stimulate the other parts of the brain in that moment to communicate with each other again momentarily. And so it's going from a car engine that is struggling to start up because the battery might be a bit flat to the battery getting a hit of energy, and then the whole engine starts up and it starts purring again. It starts working properly for a while. That's what happens with the brain when we find the right music for somebody with dementia. And the reason it's music from your childhood is because a lot of our music taste is formed in our early years. And this is an overly simplistic way of looking at it. But the reason for that is from the moment we're born until about our early 20s, our brain is expanding and learning. And then at some point in our 20s, it's optimizing, it's discarding things that it doesn't need to function better. So in our early years, we have a lot of first time experiences. And when music is attached to those experiences, it's imprinted into our brain. And while it might be really hard for us to recall that out of ourselves, if that music plays, our brain instantly goes back to that. It recalls it and goes, oh, yeah, you were 13 and it was your first high school dance with that girl you had a crush on. It's instant. Like I can say for me, Tony Braxton. As soon as I hear that song, I go, high school dance when I was 13. It's instantaneous. So that's the example for dementia, but every type of use case is different. Parkinson's, as an example, that is a movement disorder, right? That's a disconnect between the brain sending information to the body. And what research has found is as we get older, our natural ability to produce dopamine, which is our pleasure and reward hormone, neurotransmitter, sorry, that decreases naturally. And there are ways that we can elevate that, obviously. But for somebody with Parkinson's, dopamine is much, much lower. And part of the problem with that and the other neurotransmitters, and again, I'm translating what I've been taught by the neuroscientists here, The messaging between the body and the brain is in disconnect, in disarray, which is why you get the tremors and the movement. Part of that is because there's less neurotransmitters. What they found in the research with music is that if you find music that has a steady rhythm, and a tango is always used as an example, like has a really pronounced beat, you can actually get somebody to move to that rhythm. It allows the brain and the body to sync up again momentarily. So it's a great exercise to allow the two to come together again. What we also know about music is that if you play music that you love, your guilty pleasures, you get a hit of dopamine. And so for somebody that has low dopamine, producing more dopamine can be beneficial. So you can imagine that for somebody with Parkinson's, if they're able to listen to the music that they love, really those guilty pleasures, the ones that you want to sing along to no matter what, that also have a steady, pronounced beat, that type of music can be used as part of their daily exercise with movement and can help that process. So those are just two examples. There's many, many more. But the idea is if you understand what the outcome is that you want to achieve, you know how to apply the music and what type of music to apply.
Well, thank you for that. Just to bring everybody into context here, because you used two examples, of course, dementia and Parkinson's, which are serious diseases. Everyone, it's hard to find someone who hasn't been directly or indirectly impacted by these diseases, right? You either have somebody you know directly, or you know somebody who's has a relative or a friend who's been impacted by these two. And for reasons outside of this conversation, it seems like it's getting worse. But when it comes to music therapy, it seems, and please keep me honest and correct me if I'm wrong, it sounds like, based on this, it is actually therapy, not a treatment, in the sense that in these two examples, you're able to use music to get the person from some sort of state of disarray into a better state, so that maybe they can function a little bit better temporarily, so that their immediate ecosystem improves. If they're, for example, in a assisted living facility, right, and they're struggling because the disease is doing its thing, music can help get that individual in a better state of being, so that the folks that are working can do what they have to do for this person, right? So it's, you mentioned temporarily, uh, twice in these two examples, because it's a temporary relief. You're reaching back to the past. You're reaching back to these connections that most likely are still there, because, as you said, these diseases tend to not touch those long-term memory areas until way later. You're using these dopamine hits, using all of this that music brings, because music has this ability to increase brain activity uniformly, or not uniformly, but everywhere, so that the person can maybe be more at ease instead of at the mercy of the disease. Am I saying this right?
Yeah, what's important to distinguish here, though, very briefly, is it's not a treatment. You're right. That's definitely not what this is. It's an intervention. And when we talk about music as therapy, there's really three main categories. So there is music therapy, which is a licensed music therapist doing a therapy session where they use music, and that's a one-on-one or sometimes in group activities. There's what we traditionally know as music interventions, which is people playing a musical instrument or participating in music in some way to feel better. And then there's music medicine, which is listening to music as a passive thing to make people feel uh, different. Usually it's, from a negative state to a positive state. The work that we're doing with music health is combining the three. And the big takeaway there is that there are benefits to all three, but there are also serious limitations to all of them. The biggest one with music therapy is that it's a manual process limited by human capacity. And there are simply not enough music therapists around the world to be able to provide services to everyone that could benefit from it. And it's also, there's a price thing, it's prohibitive, etc. So there's a scaling issue. Music interventions, I come from a musical background. I played musical instruments. Playing an instrument is great for your brain, but it's also not for everyone. It is challenging, and it's like learning a new language. Some people pick it up like that, others struggle a bit more with it. So, while I definitely think it's something that everyone should do to some extent, learning how to play jazz guitar might not just be your thing. And that's also okay, because there is the third one, which is passive listening to music. If we combine the three, what we have essentially created with our precision music, and we'll get to that in a second, is an AI driven technology that is self managed, meaning you do not need a music therapist to provide the right music for you based on your needs. Music based interventions. Now that's a mouthful, but the idea there being, how can we apply music at the right time to momentarily change the outcomes that we want. To your point, like with dementia, oftentimes it's making somebody feel safe. That's a big thing. If you're confused, you don't know where you are, you don't recognize the people that are caring for you, that can be very scary, right? So just the ability to feel safe and comfortable is a big thing. Parkinson's, you're very aware of what's going on. Your brain works great in every other capacity, but it's not communicating with your body, which leads to a lot of frustration. So if you have an exercise that you can do where you can feel that synchronicity again, that's a wonderful experience. But it's not a cure. It's not going to get rid of what you're dealing with, but it does give you some power back in that moment, which we think is important.
I'm glad that you made that breakdown because for me, I am an amateur guitarist, and I do some singing as well. And I personally feel the difference. Granted, I'm not suffering from any ailments, thankfully, but I can feel at a moment of stress the difference between listening to something that is soothing for me versus picking up the guitar and playing. For me, actually, and I don't know if there's any correlation. I love your feedback on this, but for me, depending on the level of stress that I am allowing myself to experience, I can soothe myself by either listening to something in my catalog of soothing music, if you will, versus picking up the guitar and playing, versus picking up the guitar, playing, and singing, right? And if I'm honest with myself, there's been a handful of moments where the stress level is so, I've allowed myself to get so stressed out that even singing and playing the guitar won't do it. So I got to go and go for a run or go for a walk or go do something else, right? So I can imagine, right, that there's that spectrum of listening versus actually doing, and then how much of it you're actually doing that can help an individual get into that, either that place of safety or that place of steady state.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I find it, I use music throughout the day myself, um, often with headphones on because of, again, the negative sounds around in my environment in the city. But there are times where, again, if I can anticipate correctly, and sometimes I get this right, sometimes I don't, then I know what music to play, and it evens out pretty quickly. But there are times of high stress in the environment that I'm in, where that same music will cause further agitation. And a big part of that is when we are stressed out, what we're trying to do is level out our cortisol levels, our fight and flight responses, bring them back to baseline, and for the brain to say, you're safe, it's okay. Because when we're stressed, that cortisol is being pushed, right? Like um, we're on high levels of alert. And so that requires processing power. What's coming, I got to be ready. So adding something like trying to play the guitar and singing is more compute power, again, in simplistic terms. So in that moment, that might just cause further stress. Whereas what you really need to is maybe just lie down, breathe, and listen to some ambient sounds that you enjoy, for example. But this is different for every person, right? Because I know people that it really helps them to relax to listen to heavy metal. Heavy metal is not relaxing to me in any capacity. Doesn't mean I don't like it, but I need to be in a special mental state to be able to enjoy it. But if, there's a nurse that I know that that's what she listens to relax. So it's different for everyone, right? So you need to be self aware enough to understand what that is for you to get the most out of it. And I think that's where we've failed as a society with music to understand our individual needs with the music. So we go with, for simplicity, the radio format is I'm told this is what I need to listen to feel relaxed. And then somehow you don't feel relaxed. It's because it's not tailored to you specifically. Like one size does not fit all with music taste. I'll just I'll add this point because it's an example that I give often. But our music taste is like our DNA. Like you and I, we share 99.9% the same DNA. Yet it's that zero point 0.1 that makes us completely different human beings, right? It's the same with our music taste. You and I might have a lot of overlap with music that we enjoy, but it's these outliers that you talked about before that define what our music taste is. And that has everything to do with how it makes us feel. And like you said, like face value, there's some songs from your past where if you analyze them, you're like, questionable, but they make you feel great. I have examples of artists and music that my parents listened to that if you look at it today and you listen to it today, you think, gosh, that's cheesy. But they instantly give me good memories. I One of my favorite artists is Aretha Franklin because of my parents. And every time I hear Aretha Franklin, it sparks a good memory for me. And so I know that if I feel down for whatever reason, there's a particular Aretha Franklin song I can play. And as soon as we get to the chorus, change man. And I'm self aware to know all the different types of music that I can do that with. And the mission with what we're doing with music health is making that really easy for others to be able to find that so they understand how and what to do.
Well, that's fantastic. And that's a great lead in because unfortunately we are running out of time. But I want to give you the opportunity to kind of wrap everything around that we've talked about because we've talked about mental health, brain diseases, but also we've talked about ourselves, right? And how music helps us, folks that fortunately we're not suffering from these diseases. But you guys are looking at all of this, right? You're looking at music as a tool to keep us healthy, to help those who are suffering from disease to have a little bit better quality of life. So take take the next handful of minutes and kind of just put everything together from your perspective, from what you're trying to accomplish and what you're trying to offer the world in this particular domain.
Yeah, thank you. So, with music health, our core technology is called precision music. And our goal and our aim with precision music is twofold. But what this technology enables us to do is identify and find the right music at the right time to alter, modify a mood or mental state.